Welcome to this Angiverse. What if you died in the apocalypse, only to wake up 10 years earlier, with all your memories intact? Lewis thought his story was over when he threw himself into a fireball to save a child. But fate gave him another chance, back in a world that hasn't ended yet. Now he has 57 days to prepare before doomsday strikes again. This is a tale of survival, rebirth, and one man's desperate struggle to outsmart the end of the world. Welcome to the Reborn Otaku's Code of Practice for the Apocalypse. Ah, shoot, I shouldn't have been so soft-hearted to buy and save that little brat. Lewis's curse was a raw rasp, lost in the din of the narrow alleyways. He weaved left, then right, a desperate dance after the small, darting figure ahead, a boy, quick and slippery as a fish. One fled, one pursued, vendors and pedestrians lining the roadside watched, their expressions a mix of amusement and detached curiosity, treating the chase like a passing spectacle. The boy wore nothing but a tattered burlap sack, barely covering his thighs. At a glance, everyone understood, the man behind him had lost his goods. Tisk, these days, only the rich can afford to buy kids, a voice muttered, thick with judgment. If it's just about solving your bodily needs, why not fork over a few first-grade credits and head to the red light district instead? Another scoffed, the words sharp as a thrown stone. A sharp left, a desperate right, another sudden twist, and then, chaos erupted at the intersection. A gang of burly men brawled in the street, fists flying, fireballs surging through the air, painting the grimy urban canvas with flashes of dangerous light. Damn it, raging flames and what? Chaos, Lewis snarled, skidding to a halt, his chest heaving. What kind of rotten luck was this? All he'd wanted was to spend his birthday money, years of meticulously hoarded credit savings, on a meaningful gift. But then he'd stumbled upon a slave trader. And that child, with his dark, stubborn eyes and a body crisscrossed with scars, had inexplicably snagged his attention. A foolish, tender desire had bloomed in his chest. To save him, to raise him, he always wanted to have his own child, to have a family despite the apocalypse. He wanted someone to accompany him in his desolate later years. But before the deal was even finalized, the boy bolted. Now, he was sprinting straight through the heart of a brutal gangfight. Lewis gritted his teeth, a bitter taste in his mouth. He'd heard the stories, slave traders colluding with children to scam buyers. Money exchanged hands, the kid vanished, only to reappear later after the buyer gave up, left empty-handed. He'd never experienced it himself because he'd never bought anyone before. But today, on his 32nd birthday, he'd let a fleeting moment of empathy override his hard-earned cynicism. And sure enough, there was no good in this world. The boy stumbled, freezing in the middle of the melee, dazed and utterly lost. A fireball, its origin unknown, hurtled toward him, a searing orange blur against the grimy backdrop. Terror seized the boy's chest, a cold, suffocating grip. He hadn't escaped being bought just to die like this. Was this truly the end? Suddenly, a powerful shove from behind. The boy's wide, crow-black eyes turned to see the man who'd pushed him out of the way, thin and pale, but with surprising strength. A searing gust of wind. The fireball struck Lewis square in the chest. His tea-colored eyes dimmed, the world dissolving into an inky blackness. He blinked. What? I'm dead, I'm not dead, I'm dead, he continuously repeated. Flat on his back, Lewis lay on an old wooden bed, eyes fixed blankly on the ceiling, the words a low, bewildered mumble. Only after looping the surreal litany a dozen times did the fog begin to clear. He bolted upright, a sudden jolt of adrenaline, and staggered to the wardrobe, an antique piece, a relic from his parents. He stood before the full-length mirror, and froze. His breath hitched in his throat. Slowly, tentatively, he reached up, touching his cheek. The stress lines carved by a decade of apocalypse were gone. No more malnourished, jaundiced skin. No more weathered, calloused hands. His joints weren't twisted from endless labor, and his nails weren't blackened from grime. This face, this body? He'd reverted back by 10 years. I've really gone back? His hands trembled, not with weakness, but with a profound, disbelieving awe. They weren't baby soft, but they were clean, slender, nothing like the worn-down shells they'd become. Covering his face with both hands, Lewis sank weakly to the ground. Tears, hot and silent, slid down his cheeks. He didn't know the exact date, didn't know how it had happened, but everything was irrevocably different. The air, the atmosphere, his body, and the place. This was Haven City, home, his old home, the only thing his parents had left him. Before the apocalypse, before it all went to hell, he sat on the floor until dusk, motionless, a statue carved from disbelief and dawning hope. Eventually, stiff and hollow, Lewis stood and shuffled to the kitchen. He found a packet of instant noodles, a forgotten treasure. As he boiled the water, a warm, impossibly nostalgic smell filled the room. He nearly cried again. At the beginning of the apocalypse, you could still find instant noodles in ruined supermarkets. But later, completely extinct, at the last 2 bases he'd stayed in, thanks to mutated crops, only dry rations remained, nothing with actual flavor. Even if these noodles weren't as good as they used to be, to the reborn Lewis, they were a delicacy beyond compare. 1 bowl wasn't enough. His appetite had returned with his youth, and 10 years of starvation made it ravenous. He checked the date again. September 8th, wallet in hand, Lewis approached the front door. He hesitated for a long moment, his hand hovering over the knob, then took a deep, fortifying breath, opened it, and stepped outside. A fruit knife, a small but comforting weight, was tucked into his waistband. He moved with caution down the stairs, every shadow a potential threat from a past that hadn't yet arrived. At the neighborhood gate, he paused, his heart thudding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. People bustled in and out of the complex. Normal, alive, I've really come back, the world hasn't ended yet. He stopped at a ramen stall just outside the neighborhood. In his left hand, a flatbread sandwich. In his right, chopsticks laden with beef ramen. He took a bite, the fragrant broth hit his tongue, a burst of flavor so profound it brought tears to his eyes. Back then, even after reaching Apex City base, flour was a luxury. Ramen? Impossible. The lowest rungs of society couldn't afford to dream of it. Even if he had credits, no one sold unmutated food anymore. These things were relics, echoes of a lost world. Lewis? Not working today? Lewis turned, startled. A familiar neighborhood uncle stood nearby, a black plastic bag in hand, probably seafood. Ah, no, not much going on today. His past self was still working odd jobs, right? No work? The uncle raised a brow, a hint of concern in his voice. Then he smiled and clapped Lewis on the shoulder. It's okay, lad, you're still young, there's always a chance to start fresh. He chatted on for a while, but Lewis could barely place him. Maybe a neighbor from another floor? Or someone he only ever nodded to? And his job? Lewis sighed, slurping the last mouthful of soup. He stared at the endless stream of traffic, a river of normalcy he'd once thought lost forever. 2 months left until the apocalypse. No point going to work. He stood, paid, walked straight to a real estate agent. Selling online would cut out transaction fees, sure. But time was short. He needed to sell his only property and move to Apex City. That city would last more than 10 years after the apocalypse. He'd lived there for 8. Within a day, people came to view the apartment, each one trying to haggle him down. But even after deliberately pricing it below market value, Lewis held firm. $30,000 was his bottom line. He needed every coin. On the 3rd wave of visits, someone finally agreed. Contract signed, payment made. It took 20 days to process everything, an agonizing wait. But at last, Lewis boarded the vehicle bound for Apex City. Looking out the window, at the familiar yet strange world rushing past, he felt a wave of bittersweet nostalgia. He'd only ever been to Apex City once with his parents, before school. But when the apocalypse broke out, Metro City was overrun, and Apex City became his refuge. For 10 years, Lewis had no power, no connections, no base chief family, but he survived. Again and again, he dodged death, relying on caution, instinct, and a bit of recklessness when it counted. Even in the end, it was his choice to die, to throw himself between a child and a fireball. And now, he was back. No abilities, no desire to cling to anyone powerful, just his memories and the stark, unyielding will to survive. Step 1. Sell everything. Step 2. Reach Apex City. Step 3. Find a safe place to live. At a large real estate office, Lewis found it, his ultimate goal. This is a newly built neighborhood, the agent chirped, her voice bright and eager. Just renovated, barely anyone's moved in yet. It's a rooftop duplex, great view, great air. Price is high, but definitely worth it. Lewis read the specs, his eyes scanning every detail, every line of text. Perfect, exactly what he needed. Take me to see it. Of course, right this way. The agent led Lewis out of the office and toward a nearby apartment complex, its new facade gleaming under the city sun. Brand new neighborhood in the southwest sector. Some buildings are still under construction, the agent chirped, a practiced smile on her face. But this unit? Perfect location, newly renovated, quiet, great view. Right now, not many tenants, but once the new supermarket is up, this area will thrive. Louis said nothing, nodding politely as the sales pitch rolled on, the words washing over him like a distant hum. He already knew the truth. Only 2 floors of that building were actually complete. The so-called supermarket, just a rumor, a whisper of future prosperity. But it didn't matter. This place would soon become prime real estate, the golden downtown after the apocalypse. Why? Because 2 army regiments were stationed nearby, both in the southwest. When everything fell apart, that proximity would transform this location into an unassailable fortress. Louis remembered it clearly. After the outbreak, 2 major survivor bases had quickly been established, the southwest base, protected by the military, and the eastern base, developed a bit later. A year after Metro City fell, Louis had escaped north to the southwest base. A year after that, he made it to the eastern base. But when he finally reached Apex City, mutated animals appeared alongside zombies. Total chaos. Still, he remembered the basement unit in Eastern Building 3. His home for 8 long years during the apocalypse. Cramped, sunless, a prison, really, but now, he had a choice. Basements in this time were still rented out for storage. He'd never go back. In the hallway, the signs of burgeoning life were already creeping in. Strings of phone numbers scribbled on the walls in oil pen, flyers plastered everywhere offering plumbing and AC installation. Even the elevator was blanketed in ads. Louis scanned the cluttered space as they entered the lift. The agent gave an awkward chuckle. People come early to post stuff. No surveillance yet. It's not technically private property, so. As usual, Louis said coolly, his gaze lingering on the crude graffiti. He could already see what this hallway would become. Smeared with blood, brain matter, and desperate handprints. Graffiti covered in gore, bullet holes pockmarking the walls. But for now, it was still just ugly, not terrifying. They reached the 16th floor. The agent unlocked the door and motioned inside. First floor's got a living room, balcony, kitchen, bathroom, and a small storage room. Upstairs, a terrace, 2 bathrooms, and 3 bedrooms, 1 master, 2 smaller. Go ahead, check it out, she added, fully furnished. Secure door. A family was supposed to move in, but they got transferred for work, too far from here. That's why it's up for rent. Just needs appliances, really. Louis said nothing, but he already knew the backstory. This apartment had been meant for an elderly relative, chosen specifically for the terrace and its quiet isolation. But that person had died of illness, and now the place sat empty. The agent clearly didn't want to scare him off with the full truth. Louis didn't care. What mattered was the sunlight streaming in through the large rear windows, a luxury he hadn't seen in his past life for years. Upstairs, he ignored the empty bedrooms and headed straight to the terrace. It was glass-sealed, tempered for safety. The rooftop was windy, but the enclosure would keep it protected. Even better, it was strong enough to hold up in rough weather. For 3,500 credits a month, this was a steal, especially considering how astronomically expensive living in the city would become later. Okay, Louis finally said, his voice firm. The house is good, so you'll take it? The agent asked quickly, her eyes widening with surprise and hope. Yes. When can we sign the contract? The agent beamed and pulled out her phone to call the landlord. Within days, the paperwork was finalized, 3,500 credits monthly rent, 3 months deposit, and a 3,500 credit agent fee. On the morning of October 1st, Louis signed the agreement and received the keys to his dream home. In his past life, he had envied this place. When he finally arrived at Apex City's southwest base, it was already too late. Home planting techniques and DIY water purification were widely known. Explorer teams had collected mutated crop seeds from the surrounding farmlands. The research department had studied them, and discovered some could grow fast with high yields. Those were quickly popularized to ensure basic survival. But Louis? All he had was a tiny 10-square-meter basement, buried behind other buildings. No light, no airflow. While earlier residents had installed solar panels on their rooftops, Louis had to buy power at outrageous prices from neighbors. Even so, he survived. He planted what little he could, bean sprouts, chives, garlic. Crops that didn't need much light, and even some shade-tolerant mutated plants. He made it work, because he had to. And compared to that version of life, this place, with glass, sun, air, felt like paradise. At the time of the apocalypse, only 8 buildings in this neighborhood had been constructed. 6 were ready for sale, and this very unit had been renovated just a month earlier. When the world fell apart, only 4 buildings were fully finished. 2 were fortified by the army to provide safe housing. The remaining 2 were incomplete, doors and windows never even installed. But the army didn't manage the completed units. That meant original owners were on their own. Lewis recalled that a family of 3 had moved in just 2 weeks before the apocalypse, despite the lack of appliances. Most migrant workers had passed on it. Without basic machines, it would cost too much to settle here. But Lewis had always known, this house was special. Later, he planned to buy solar panels from the military. He could mount them by the windows. If he didn't want to pay others for power again, he'd need to be self-sufficient. He remembered Mrs. Wu, a hard, frugal woman, who ran a monopoly on rooftop energy. Bulk buyers might have gotten a discount, but Lewis never did. Eventually, he gave up and bought himself a rechargeable battery system. He and Mrs. Wu had nearly come to blows more than once. Her family, thick-waisted and stubborn, made their living off power sales. They never grew crops like others did. Her son had never once left the protected zone. She wouldn't allow it, too afraid he'd die in an expedition. And after the landlord vanished in the early days of the apocalypse, the family took over. Probably died, Lewis thought. Even if they had returned, base regulations would have reassigned the house anyway. Housing rights were dictated by the military now. Lewis was no saint. He wasn't here to be a hero. He was just an ordinary man, a survivor. This house was now his. A fortress in the making. Something he never had in his last life. And now, he'd protect it, strengthen it, transform it. He would turn it into a stronghold, a place of comfort and peace to endure the long, brutal apocalypse ahead. There are now 57 days until the end of the world. With a new mobile phone, internet access, and a balance of 325,700 credits, Lewis drove his newly acquired 9,000 credit second-hand car to the largest hardware store in the southwestern part of Haven City. This is it, he thought, gripping the steering wheel. The first real step, no more waiting. His first purchases were meticulously planned, a comprehensive toolset, an assortment of other essential implements, a robust solar charging system, and several rolls of privacy window film. Every single item counts, he mused, checking off his mental list. Afterward, he drove to a nearby farmer's market, where he carefully selected seeds and acquired water purification filters. What should be prioritized during the apocalypse? Lewis firmly believed it came down to 3 essentials. First, clean water. Second, adequate calories from food. And third, weapons and clothing. Water sources became contaminated shortly after the apocalypse began. Lewis, always cautious, had noticed how the base in Metro City encouraged purification by freely distributing water filters. Drawing from his academic knowledge, he had even built a homemade distillation system. It was time-consuming and resource-intensive, but for Lewis, safety took precedence over convenience. He even boiled and sanitized the distilled water before drinking it. Many people found that process too troublesome, opting to simply boil their water without further purification. When Metro City's base later collapsed due to a sudden zombie outbreak inside its walls, Lewis wasn't surprised. Fools, he thought, a grim memory flashing. In fact, many doomsday bases fell apart due to internal issues, contaminated food and water chief among them. In the beginning, zombies were sluggish, and plants and animals were still normal. Multiple bases were quickly established across the country, supported by military forces in each province. As long as the army responded swiftly, they could rescue civilians and build strongholds. Even better, many soldiers developed various abilities due to their physical constitutions, creating a formidable defensive force. This was one reason why Lewis chose to move to the southwest ahead of time. Proximity to the military is the closest thing to a cheat code he'll get. But water wasn't the only issue. Food became a major problem. Though the apocalypse began in winter and most people survived on their existing stores, crop mutation wasn't noticed until spring and summer, when survivors began venturing out to collect supplies. Were mutant crops edible? Would they have adverse side effects? Famine became a looming threat until researchers identified safe, edible strains of mutated plants the following year. Lewis's past life had been hard. He'd experienced the fall of 2 cities. He later joined a search team in Apex City but couldn't handle evolved zombies as an ordinary person. Lacking firearms experience, no team would accept someone so unskilled. So he focused on growing shade-loving crops at home. When a crop was harvested and sold, he immediately replanted. From that point, life began to improve. Still, he regretted lacking sunlight. He had missed out on planting many high-yield crops simply because he'd lived in a basement. This time, he'll have access to the sun and everything he needs. Louis reminisced as he drove back home, hauling his purchases into the elevator bit by bit. Fortunately, even during the apocalypse, there was still some electricity. The building's elevator operated between 7 to 9 a.m. and 5 to 7 p.m. each day. Though he had lived in a basement previously, now he needed to remember the elevator's operating hours, especially when buying electricity. Once everything was brought inside, Louis pulled out his cell phone and went online. With the home still empty, online shopping was the fastest and most efficient way to stock up. He hadn't bought the phone solely for shopping. Phones still worked after the apocalypse. Once the base was established, researchers developed a new type of SIM card usable inside the base. Officials could use it to broadcast messages and maintain public morale. There were also radio stations playing 24/7, announcing updates like newly discovered crops, edible animals, and general news. Louis began adding item after item to his online carts. In his past life, he was totally unprepared. This time, he would be different. As long as no installation was required, he just needed to provide an address for delivery. He shopped throughout the night, driven by a quiet urgency. The next morning, Louis rolled up his sleeves and got to work. He cut the window film to size, climbed up using a sturdy folding ladder, and meticulously stuck the film to the dampened glass using a watering can. He covered the terrace windows first, then moved on to the living room windows for good measure. It was tedious work, but absolutely necessary. After the apocalypse, if your balconies were full of thriving plants, anyone who said, "It's no problem," was a dangerous liar. In a world crawling with zombies, people mostly relied on processed food or dry staples like rice and flour. A home with fresh vegetables and home-cooked meals? That was a neon target for thieves and looters. So Louis's first priority was securing his own safety. Once the windows were done, he carefully set up 2 large solar panels on the patio. He'd only bought one set for now. The panels were expensive, and there were still many things he needed to buy. If he ran out of funds, he could always raid the hardware store after the apocalypse began. In the beginning, zombies were slow and brainless. Those brave enough to act early gained the most. He used the remaining window film on his used car's windows. After spending nearly the entire day working indoors, Louis cleaned up and drove out to scout a particular location. Although he had lived in the southwestern base for 8 years, much had changed during the post-disaster reconstruction. Some residential areas had collapsed, new ones had been built, and many public buildings were different. When doomsday came, many supermarkets were looted beyond recognition. Louis needed to refamiliarize himself with nearby stores and supply points. He couldn't rely entirely on online orders. Though the Southwest was somewhat remote, it was a popular choice for office workers due to lower housing prices and its proximity to the city via metro. As a result, the area was well developed, with facilities at nearly every turn. Louis was surprised to find a supermarket every few intersections. He spotted 3 major national chains, plus countless convenience stores. He marked all the key locations on a physical city map and planned to do the same on a digital map later. He eventually stopped at a large supermarket and pulled into the parking lot. Credit card in hand, he pushed a cart inside and began familiarizing himself with the store layout. He had already spent 30,000 credits at the hardware store and farmer's market, plus 7,888 credits during last night's online shopping. That left him with about 200,000 credits. He estimated spending around 1,000 credits in the supermarket. He loaded the cart with oil, rice, noodles, instant noodles, and other staple foods. While passing the household goods aisle, he realized he had forgotten to buy bedding and a change of clothes. Damn it, how could I forget something so basic? He glanced at the price tags and compared them to online prices. Buying online was cheaper and more convenient, especially with home delivery. His cart was already full, so it would have to wait. He finished by tossing in various cooking utensils. At checkout, Louis declined to apply for a membership card. He wheeled his loaded cart into the parking lot, packed the car, and drove home. Once inside, Louis collapsed on the floor, groaning, "My strength is so pitiful." Pathetic. Currently, his strength was average at best. Even compared to the malnourished conditions of his past life, his current student body was weak. But how could he train now? In time, if he worked hard and stayed consistent, he could slowly rebuild his strength. With that thought, he closed his eyes and made a few last-minute purchases on his phone before heading upstairs. On the second floor, he piled thick clothing into a corner, forming a makeshift nest. Then, he lay down and fell into a deep sleep. In the city, the night was often more vibrant than the day. Laughter and music spilled from a bar, where men and women indulged in fleeting festivities. A flirtatious woman, wearing a tight-fitting miniskirt that highlighted her tiny waist and curves, stalked forward like a cat towards a sofa in the corner. "Hey handsome, want to drink with me?" The woman fluttered her eyelashes, but the man merely shifted, his peach blossom eyes, one graced with a subtle mole, narrowing almost imperceptibly. He lounged on the sofa, his appearance and temperament attracting the attention of all the women in the bar. "Leave." His voice was a low, cold rasp, devoid of mercy. The woman froze, stunned, not quite believing what she'd heard. A heavy hand grasped her shoulder. "Woman, there is no place for you here." She spun around to face a man in his late 40s or early 50s, flanked by burly bodyguards. Those near the sofa quickly cleared the premises, muttering curses about their bad luck tonight. "There's a million credits on this card to give to your mother," the middle-aged man said, sliding a card onto the table as he settled beside the younger man. "Why bring the matter to me? Why don't you call her?" The young man, Ethan, sneered, pulling out his own phone and dialing numbers. "You called me out for this?" He drawled, "Isn't it better to give this to her directly to ensure all the money goes through?" The older man, Victor, pinched his temple, a vein throbbing. "Tell her your uncle has been laid off and to watch out for trouble." Ethan pinched the card with a mocking smile. "You will not divorce yet you need me to deal with a trifle during the middle of the night?" "Victor, I am not your subordinate. I don't care about this matter. Send one of your lackeys instead." He dropped the card back onto the table and turned towards the door. Victor's face contorted into an ugly expression. "I also wanted to see you. I am alive, no need to worry." Ethan exited the oppressive bar atmosphere, stepping out into the cool night air. The next morning, Louis was roused by the insistent ringing of his doorbell. "My orders have already arrived?" "So fast," he thought, a hint of surprise in his voice. He sighed and shook his head. Deliveries for online shopping in Metro City had never been like this in his past life. Some packages dragged on for 10.5 months on average. He hadn't expected Express City delivery to be so prompt. He checked the numerous order statuses on his phone and found most had delivery status, with some still in the dispatch phase. Louis prepared to finish up at home. Louis surveyed each room and began to plan the layout while waiting for deliveries to arrive. The terrace, he knew, must be used for cultivation, and the kitchen and storage room were self-explanatory. The storage room without windows could be turned into a nursery and breeding room. The living room was relatively large, so it could be separated to store things. The two smaller bedrooms could be used to store food and tools. The last would be his personal bedroom. He also didn't need to move any bath and shower equipment. He thought back on something that had turned out useless in his past life, something nobody found necessary. The doorbell continued to ring, followed by a steady stream of packages. Zzz, the drilling sounds gave people headaches. The electric drill rang through Building 7 for over half a month. The 16th floor house was now filled with tools, boxes, and remodeled items. By October 22nd, everything Louis had ordered had been delivered to his home. The living room was now split in two. Tools and upcoming modification projects were near the balcony, with bought furniture in the hall. All foodstuffs, seeds, stocked supplies, and processed foods were sorted on the first and second floors. He still needed to buy some furniture, at least a table, chairs, a sofa, and a bed. Louis hammered his sore waist, a grunt escaping him, and entered the bathroom after setting aside a newly modified non-toxic PVC pipe. He washed his face and took a big bite of a meat bun warmed in a microwave oven. The day after the microwave oven arrived, Louis removed the sounding device after checking for quality issues. Noise, he knew, was dangerous during the apocalypse. Louis leaned against the sofa, glancing with satisfaction at the room. Now that he had refitted all the needed equipment, the rest of the day could be dedicated to preparations, such as preparing rice and wheat for the nursery in advance. Procrastination, he knew, was not a good habit at all. He threw the used plastic bags into the trash. Louis cleaned up the remaining waste, as all the useful things were already in the second-floor storage bedrooms. The balcony and terrace now had sturdy hydroponics shelves and nursery boxes. The room was now completely clean. Louis pushed the sofa and fish tanks into the living room. He relaxed on the sofa, took out his cell phone, and frowned. With the 50,000 credits left, he could go buy some food and medicine, or possibly raise some animals at home. Some animals, not just humans, also became zombies once the apocalypse started. Later, in addition to zombie animals, some became mutants instead. The mutant animals could be considered more dangerous to humans than zombies. However, if an animal was domesticated prior to mutation, it would not go rabid and instead became a helper with strong combat effectiveness. At the very least, a dog could watch the house when one went out scavenging for resources. Louis remembered how zombie animals became more dangerous than human ones. As a result, people became wary of any animals. While in Metro City, there had been an old man with a minibus. The old man's dog did not turn into a zombie and scared away intruders. He felt a pang of longing for such a loyal companion and protector. Although Louis wanted to raise one, a dog had costs: food, bones, etc. Second, what if it turned into a zombie? Even if not initially, if the dog went out of control, he could be unlucky and lose his life. He decided, I'll wait for now. It would be the same for any animal. If you had some chickens, you could get eggs and meat, but the chirping noises could attract the attention of thieves. Louis's desire to avoid trouble clashed with his wish to raise a dog. Louis planted some seeds in the nursery room box. The previous storage room had been modified so that the temperature and humidity caused germination after a few days. Since winter is approaching, he dared not cultivate too much, even if he could regulate room temperature. He reasoned that he couldn't eat or sell the plants for now, and plants and animals could mutate. If the plants were only seedlings, Louis could quickly dispose of them, but if left for too long, he would need alternative methods to destroy them without requiring physicohods to destroy them without requiring physical contact. Even though it is convenient to plant on the terrace, Louis prefers the hydroponic crops. Of course, he also planned to plant some soil-based crops. Tomorrow, he would head to the nearby fields to acquire the dirt. Hydroponic crops are easy to raise and space-efficient, no problems so long as there is a good nutritional solution. The nutrients could be purchased directly online but had to be self-made after the apocalypse. Fortunately, Louis had experience in the matter. At the moment, he only cultivated some parsley, cabbage, and rapeseed seedlings. He also had some orange, apple, cherry, and other fruit saplings in a basin. For the rest, he would wait until a few days prior to doomsday. The time would be enough for green bean and soybean sprouts, amongst others. After a few days, most of the seeds had germinated in the nursery box. There was no way to discern the dead seeds. Louis carefully cut up a sponge and placed it into the modified hydroponic cultivation tube with oxygen from a small aquarium pump to add nutrition. The small hydroponic planter was now complete. Since these were to be grown during the apocalypse, Louis ensured that the small shelves only had a dozen plants, with groups of shelves sharing a water tank. The fifth solar battery had long since been charged, and the rooms had been tidied up. Louis confirmed by walking around the house 4 or 5 times. He wondered if he had time left to do something else, a rare moment of calm settling over him. With barely 20 days until the world changed, Louis found himself with little to do that didn't involve active preparation. He wasn't ready to start processing food, but idling felt like a waste of precious time. Perhaps a companion, then? He mused. A dog. Louis quickly found one of several major dog kennels in the southwest area using his cell phone. The place boasted many good breeds and positive online reviews, making it seem like an ideal spot to purchase a dog. He drove his second-hand car southward. Dog kennels were generally built in suburban areas, more remote due to rapid city expansion. Since they needed ample space, building too close to the city would pose a problem. Buildings became more and more scarce along the road. Louis passed vast flower greenhouses and fields of harvested corn, with hay bales lying scattered like forgotten giants. Half an hour later, he spotted a sign: Showtime Dog Kennel. Showtime? Why that name? He wondered, a faint smile touching his lips. He turned down a gravel path and 10 minutes later arrived at the compound walls. A sign hung on the gate bearing the same name. Seeing a potential customer, an 18 or 19-year-old employee welcomed Louis inside, inquiring about what dog he wanted to raise. Do you have a chow chow? One around 3 to 4 months would be best. You want a dog to guard the door? Right, a few months ago we received 2 chow chows. Don't let the current price fool you. They are quality dogs. Specially bred and raised, worth more than a golden-furred husky. Louis nodded. Those sorts of dogs were fiercer, and Chow Chows were smart, thus faster to train. The two entered a room where several men were already present, having heard Louis was intending to buy. One man in the back stood. "Come with me." All along the way, dogs barked without pause. Louis also saw two majestic mastiffs. This breed of dog he knew he could not raise, in fear of it turning into a zombie during the apocalypse. He could handle a Chow Chow, but he would be dead meat against a Tibetan Mastiff. Customers did not venture far in due to the strong dog smell and high temperatures. The cages held adult dogs and some puppies. This litter is 3.5 months old, the other is 2 months. Although a bit on the small side, the breed is good. The man motioned towards the cages. The mother was growling, somehow knowing that people wanted to take her pups. Louis looked between the two cages. The 3.5-month cage had 2 puppies, while the other had 5. "Do they have a pedigree certificate?" Louis asked. "Yes, the mother is game level, and the puppies have cards." The man pointed at the 2-month cage. "These ones are expensive. The other 2 are female. 2,100 credits for both without a license." Louis instantly felt the urge to buy both Chow Chows but immediately stopped himself. 1 dog turning into a zombie is bad enough, but 2? The risk is too high. "I'll take 1 for now." "Do you have dog food and medicine?" "Yeah, we have them if you don't mind taking some older stock." Louis happily bought the supplies and selected an energetic puppy. The dog kennel also provided a printed booklet on dog care and training. His car now held 2 packages of dog food, he'd ordered extra online, and dog chew bones, which were more expensive than white rice. "If this dog does become a zombie, my heart will be crushed. And then I'd have to slowly eat the dog food myself," he thought, a dark humor touching his lips. Thinking of the body size and appetite of an adult German Shepherd, Louis felt a pang of regret. In his arms, the Chow Chow looked at him with watery eyes, its cuteness pulling at his heartstrings. "Well, you'll be with me." Holding on when the 28th arrives, he murmured to the puppy, a quiet promise. Louis remembered his lonely previous life. This time, he would have a companion if the puppy survived November 28th. Louis stored the dog food, medicine, food bowl, metal cage, and other things in the car with the help of an employee named Xiao Jiao. While driving by, I saw a village. "Do people live there?" Louis asked. Xiao Jiao nodded. "Yes, all the villagers." "Is there someone selling poultry?" Louis inquired. Xiao Jiao laughed. "You're going to buy organic food on the way back? It's not far from the city, but the price isn't low. I'll take you there if you really want to buy." The kennel was usually not that busy. Sometimes a couple of employees could skip without issue. Xiao Jiao went to the car, and the two chatted while driving. Louis learned that the village was Xiao Jiao's hometown and a friend had recommended him to the dog kennel. The village was one big family. Everyone free-ranged some chickens and geese while planting a few crops in their yards. Louis bought 10 live chickens and ducks, as well as 2 geese he asked for help to kill for easier storage. He also bought 2 baskets of chicken eggs, a basket of duck eggs, and some additional bamboo baskets. Xiao Jiao returned home and found his family had planted a star anise tree. "Can you give me a tree branch?" Louis asked, realizing he had forgotten about these kinds of things. "Why do you want these things? The supermarket sells this stuff too?" Xiao Jiao shrugged and cut down 3 or 4 branches, since Louis had bought many things by haggling. "No problem, I'm just playing around planting on my balcony." Louis joyfully replied. "Any plants in particular? My family has a strawberry plant that regrows quickly each year without fail." Xiao Jiao's mother wrapped the plants in old newspaper pages. Thank you, thank you." Louis then pointed at a grinding disc. "Are you selling that?" Xiao Jiao was speechless. He figured Louis was a rich second generation from the city spending money like water. "That is too heavy, we wouldn't be able to move it to your car. My family has 2 small manual grinders, do you want them?" "No one uses them since we switched to an electric model." Louis bought the 2 small hand grinders and an electric husker. The price was cheap since both were used. Louis checked the internet and found that part replacements were relatively rare. He would need to buy from large farmers markets or a specialty tool shop. Too much trouble, he thought. I'll buy those later at home. The electric husker was pretty much brand new since Xiao Jiao had barely used it. Hearing that Louis was a rich city person with money to spare, a child ran over and tugged on his clothes. "My house has a quail, you want it?" "Quail? Let me take a look first." Louis nodded in shock. According to the child, the family was not willing to keep the small caged quails since they laid few eggs in cold weather. They brought the birds over in hope of earning some pocket money. Checking the quail, it could not be considered poultry with its pitiful size, although it would lay eggs. Even if they mutated, they were small enough for Lewis to deal with. There were 8 quails in the cage, 2 male and the rest female. Lewis placed them in the car along with some salted duck eggs he bought along the way. With all the luggage stowed away, Lewis held the puppy and drove home in his used car. The cage was positioned so that the Chow Chow could become familiar with the house environment. Lewis checked his bank account and pockets. His funds were down to 20,000 credits. After looking through various online stores, Lewis decided to spend his remaining money at a farmer's market to buy a final batch of food, seeds, and other things. Then he would visit the suburbs and dig up some soil. Finally, he would go home and rest for a few days. Early next morning, Lewis gave the puppy some food and water, checked the temporary quail nest, then grabbed his jacket and walked out the door. The puppy gazed pitifully at Lewis's back, its occasional whimpers tugging at his heart. After returning home last night, the puppy was cruelly left in the cage. Lewis provided food and water but no care. To be honest, Lewis was not resistant to the puppy's charm, but he couldn't allow himself to get close to her now. He could steal his heart and kill an unrelated mutated animal during the apocalypse. However, if it's his own pet, whether in the past or present, in some ways Lewis's heart was very fragile. To this day, he remembered his neighbors becoming zombies and attacking one after another. The sight of familiar faces scavenging for food crushed his heart. So for his second chance, he chose to leave Haven City. In a positive light, it showed he had foresight. In a cynical light, he was fleeing. He would rather kill a group of strange zombies than confront a group with familiar faces. Therefore, he did not dare name the little Chow Chow puppy, in fear of developing feelings and emotional ties. The doorway became an enclosed space due to Lewis's home renovation. To enter the living room, one now had to pass through an additional door. This was a crucial safety precaution. In the event someone opened the outer door after the apocalypse, they would not see the entire house at a glance. At this moment, Lewis was sitting in the entranceway, putting on his shoes, when a chorus of whimpers echoed from the living room. "You, acting so pitiful." Lewis exasperatedly strode back into the house and lifted the puppy by her scruff. "You want to go outside with me?" The puppy panted, her small tongue lolled out, and her brush-like tail wagged back and forth. "Why? It's so cold outside. Honestly, just stay home and behave." The puppy's tail continued to wag, a silent plea. Lewis bent over and put the puppy back in her cage. "Woo!" The pitiful voice resurfaced, and the tail drooped. Lewis soothingly patted the puppy's head. "I'll be back later and bring something good. So behave at home, don't make too much noise." He knew that if the weather permitted, he might spoil the puppy and hold it outside, but the puppy was too young, and the weather was too cold. The dog was rather smart. No matter what Lewis said, she wouldn't let up, so she quietly laid on the mat, looking with big, soulful eyes. Lewis sighed, feeling he had brought a big problem back. Even if the puppy did not mutate, how would he walk the dog when grown with zombies everywhere? He changed his shoes, locked the door, and headed to the elevator with another sigh. A new notice was posted on the first floor near the elevator. Printed above, it read, "On December 10th, the property offices open the doors. Hydro, electricity, and gas may be subject to change before and after the New Year's Day, to be notified otherwise." The building had not yet been completely set up. Water and electricity timetables were temporary. One did not have to pay every month. The utility companies would come and collect fees after everything was finalized. Lewis read the notice again, shaking his head as he walked out. He could save some of his money for now. However, since the district was not yet completed, there were occasional temporary water shortages. He needed to reserve 2 days' worth of water. He drove home in his used car after his last shopping trip. In the past few days, he had visited the farmer's market and purchased vacuum-sealed rice, flour, oil, and other grains in bulk. Afterward, he drove to all the southwestern area pharmacies. It was inconvenient to buy medicine online, especially those with specific prerequisites. Lewis could buy basic supplies online, but for others like anti-inflammatories and cold medicine, he had to visit a pharmacy. Each time he entered a pharmacy, he only bought 1 or 2 boxes due to the limitations. However, there were dozens of pharmacies, small and large, in the area. How many could he hit? Thus, Louis spent his last sum of money on multi-purpose but hard-to-access drugs, along with some more common drugs and rice. Using this method, Louis could quietly amass a lot of medicine. The city was big enough for that. If he had enough money, he could have gone through the entire city instead. He stacked and organized everything into the house. The puppy sniffed around and perked up. Her owner had come home early. Louis had become more cautious when returning home since the puppy had attempted to run out the door. "Don't run around, you could fall off the railing," Louis huffed as he dropped the last bag of soil on the ground. His head hurt as he surveyed the filled living room. So many things, when would he have the time to organize it all? An unorganized room would never be clean. Before, Louis had purchased a number of buckets, boxes, and aquariums online. After delivery, there was barely any walking space left. Fortunately, the stacked boxes did not occupy much space. Being space efficient was a good thing. Louis temporarily piled garden supplies on the terrace. The rice, flour, oil, and grains were heaped outside the kitchen door. The storage room next to the kitchen would be used as a nursery with higher temperatures to plant shade-loving crops and maybe mushrooms. The balcony would cultivate fruits, with the remaining space used for storing hardware and tools. The living room was dedicated to storage. Louis placed 3 freezers along with a microwave oven, an electric stove, a small stone mill, a peeler, a manual meat grinder, a manual sausage machine, distillation equipment, and spare buckets and baskets. There was also a pile of bulk rice and noodles to the side. On the second floor, there was a small amount of instant food, vacuum-sealed rice, noodles, grain, oil, sealed seed packets, a spare plastic pipe, and a large amount of charcoal. In the large bedroom, there were large cabinets, a bed, a bedside table, a small desk, a laptop, and boxes of medicine. There was also spare clothing in the wardrobe, several sets of bedding, and fabric packed in compression bags. These things would always be useful. Louis remembered the disaster of 3 to 4 years before the base reorganized the textile mills. At that time, cotton, flax, and other plants had large-scale mutations. Raw materials became extremely scarce. People changed back to a pair of pants and a child. Behind the first-floor staircase, Louis hid barrels of recently bought gasoline and diesel, due to restrictions on these goods. The demand for gasoline was not that high from what he remembered from being a part of an adventure group, but it was still better to have some reserves. Lastly, on the second-floor terrace, he placed shelves above the patio. Some had plants, but others had been set aside for future use. Along with the shelves, small buckets with holes were placed alongside the terrace. For these, he could wait until spring to plant some crops according to weather conditions. A grill stood in the center of the terrace, circular with a new iron grill and filled with coal. When covered, a charcoal briquette burns faster than if open. If the sun was not strong enough or the sky was continuously cloudy, Louis could feed charcoal to the fire. He would also use wood as fuel if reserves ran low. By the time everything was prepared, it was mid-November. Louis woke up and opened the tap to collect water. Not long ago, Louis hired someone to install solar water heaters. He also secretly added 2 on the small cistern roof. Normally, by December, the extras would have to be demolished because the weight was not safe, and authorization for public uses would be needed. But for now, it was private property. If the apocalypse did not occur, Louis would naturally remove the water tank. However, if doomsday did occur as foretold, the water heaters would be a life-saving measure. The kitchen cabinets were filled with all sorts of things. Louis joyfully rolled up his sleeves, hands covered in flour. How many years had it been since he cooked with white flour and rice? He did not get the chance in his previous life. Before the apocalypse, Louis bought all his food other than instant noodles. He could only fry and scramble eggs. He actually learned how to cook after the apocalypse, but by then, he had no chance. Ordinary people could not buy rice. Now he had an abundance of ingredients, water, and electricity. If not now, then when would he be able to cook to his heart's desire? The puppy was sleeping with a full stomach. The milk was not the same as mother's, but there were no thieving brothers or sisters. The scent of cooking and the sound of her owner's humming was very comforting. Although she couldn't huddle and snuggle with her brothers and sisters, yesterday her owner bought a dog plush she could cuddle with while sleeping. Dried chicken, duck, and goose fluttered in the breeze above the living room. A section of sausage on top resembled a banner in full flight. The past few days, once filled with drilling noises, were now imbued with the aroma of cooking. The 16th floor had transformed rapidly. Several handymen on the 14th floor balcony smelled the fragrance. One asked, "Yesterday was pancakes, what is today's smell?" "Gooba, my grandmother would cook it way more delicious than the supermarket." "What do you think they are doing? Why would they need to cook so much every day? Maybe for lunchboxes? Making lunchboxes in Gooba? There is no smell of side dishes." "Who said that? Wasn't there such a smell just yesterday?" "It was 5:30 in the evening, someone must have been cooking dinner." Today's tasks are now complete. Louis smiled as he removed the excess oil from the last piece of Gooba. He was happy, having used up half of the loose bulk rice. Bulk food was hard to store, especially in a home with many plants. He decided to make food in advance so the worms would have nutrients while digging through the soil. Louis installed a fan along with hoods for a gas stove outside the kitchen. Energy was always scarce, doubly so in an apocalypse. Therefore, he needed to save electricity in order to avoid paying any fees to foreign parties. For example, he had 3 freezers, one was vertical, the other 2 were horizontal. All 3 were large volume appliances with high energy saving capabilities. Right now, only one was operational, filled with all kinds of meat bought from the supermarket. All the bulbs were replaced with energy saving variants. Louis also stockpiled candles, alcohol, and so on. Back in the living room, the puppy saw Louis and climbed his leg, shaking her tail merrily while begging for hugs. Louis picked up the puppy and gave her chin rubs while lounging on the couch. His body stank of sweat, but Louis felt too tired and lazy to change clothes. He also couldn't be bothered, since he was alone and the puppy couldn't abandon him. There were 2 fish tanks next to the sofa, one had several fish and the other had shrimp. These were not ornamental aquatic creatures but ones bought at the market. Louis did not know the exact care methods, but they were living, cheap, and easy to bring home. The fish and shrimp species were not known due to their small size. The next day, half died, the rest dwindled down to 4 fish and 3 shrimp remaining. The 8 quails were held in a modified aquarium tank next to the balcony window. Louis had specially bought mealworms for the birds, to be stored in a separate tank. The animals were easy to raise, pad the ground and give vegetables. Louis did not know when the quails would lay eggs. Louis fished out his cell phone and aimlessly surfed the internet while glancing at his meat stores. With 2080 credits left, Louis planned to go out the day before doomsday to buy a bunch of ready-made snacks and takeaway. In between now and the apocalypse, there was not much to do other than preparing food and playing with the puppy. In less than 10 days, the world would greatly change. It was unknown how many people would die during the apocalypse. His fingers subconsciously inputted words, and Louis was drawn to one of the search results. On November 22, a forum thread titled, "How to Use Technology During the Apocalypse," was created. The content was very detailed, starting from well-known protective measures to teaching people how to repurpose existing household items, water purification, and stretching food stores. The thread attracted a large crowd of onlookers. The thread was active with sudden and spontaneous additions. Each time the writer went online, followers would happily find new content. Moderators rated it highly since there were no prophecies, rumor spreading, or telemarketing. Just practical advice on further uses of existing household items. After all, many things are readily available at home. Even if most did not believe the apocalypse would come, it was not a bad idea to grow sprouts, garlic, and cherry tomatoes at home. Even if the plants were not eaten, they could be used for greenery beside the computer. Home planting has been quietly popular in current society. Housewives afraid of potentially unsafe produce were the first to try. The tension increased since the title included apocalypse. Quite a few inquired about the topic, which drew in people with planting experience. Louis felt a faint regret as he looked out from his home. Was the post made too late? Would more people have been helped if I posted earlier? He shook his head. No, it was not too late. Louis posted the day's content and scratched the sleepy puppy. Interested people would naturally experiment and check other posts. The uninterested would do nothing, even if someone predicted the apocalypse. No one would believe conspiracy theories without proof. Even knowing that the apocalypse would start on November 28, Louis was willing to believe that his past life was nothing but a dream. It was November 26, 11 in the evening according to the phone clock. Tomorrow, he would go out one last time. The next day, doomsday began. On November 27 at 8 in the evening, the writer posted the last forum post. Many onlookers arrived early, refreshing the page in expectation of new information and tips. People had tried planting home crops, some bought distillation equipment. These were hands-on activities people had not done since leaving school science labs. At 8 o'clock, the new post appeared. Some reread the entire post since the contents were very shocking. Wastewood House. Today is the last post because after midnight on November 27th, that is November 28th, the apocalypse will arrive. The author advises the following: if you live with someone, it is best to stay in separate rooms and lock the doors since zombies cannot turn knobs by themselves. If you have pets, best keep them in cages or separate rooms because once a zombie, their lethality surpasses imagination. Those who see this message should store up as much tap water as possible since the author does not know when the water gets contaminated. Saving water costs nothing. Tomorrow everyone can have a water party. Other precautions have been described. Even if the previously mentioned items like food and medicine are not prepared, first aid maneuvers can be used until a rescue team arrives. Believe it, zombies will appear. P.S. The author hopes this prediction is false and we all see the light of day tomorrow. The reply surprised everyone who shifted to a "it is like that" mindset. Someone had speculated that the posts would lead people along then drop a bombshell. This kind of trick is common online, especially in conspiracy forums. Up until now, the writer had been teaching them while cultivating worry, but the final post made people think hogwash as expected. The last message was deleted after some discussion at 8:21 p.m. on November 28th at midnight. The sky quietly turned dark red. Some noticed but thought it was normal. Lewis stood in front of the bedroom window. The puppy was in her cage, the small quails in separate containers, and the few fish and shrimp in individual buckets. Even the worms and plants were separated from each other. Tonight had the same red sky, the same dark atmosphere. Gradually, a dark green light shined in all directions as snow began to fall. Lewis stared blankly at the sky, then crawled into bed. In his past life, he did not turn into a zombie or develop powers. Right now, he could care less about powers, he just hoped he did not wake up a zombie. If this arc meant something to you, hit that like button to support the channel, and drop a comment. We're heading into the next arc soon, so don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. This has been AAA. Until then, Jaana.